Mike Hall, the wild-haired, denim-wearing, joke-cracking car hoarder from the hit show Rust Valley Restorers, has always been more than just a TV personality. He is a man who built his entire life around rusty cars, broken memories, and a deep love for forgotten pieces of automotive history that most people would simply throw away. But over the years, fans have begun to wonder what really happened to him. Why did one of the most loved car restoration stars disappear from television, even though his show was a global success? Why did he suddenly start selling off his huge collection of more than 400 cars? Something he once swore he would never do. And what exactly is going on with his business, his crew, and his life now? The truth is not one single event. It is a mix of stress, age, reality, money, and the heavy emotional weight of running a business built on passion instead of profit. Mike Hall became famous because he was genuine. He wasn't acting on TV. He really was that guy who loved rust, loved chaos, and loved the impossible challenge of bringing a dead car back to life. But fame brought pressure, and running a Rayall shop brought even more. For years, Rust Valley became a kind of paradise for viewers, a place where friends laughed, argued, fixed cars, and lived a simple, fun life. But behind the cameras, things were not always so simple. Mike was getting older, bills were getting bigger, and the work was getting harder. Even though the show made people smile, the truth was that the business was barely surviving financially. Mike himself admitted many times that he was terrible with money. He spent too much, charged too little, and cared more about saving cars than earning profits. Season after season, he kept working harder, even as his body grew tired. By the time viewers saw the fourth season, it was clear that he was exhausted. He talked openly about stress, sleepless nights, unpaid bills, and the feeling that he was running out of time. Then came the moment that shocked everyone, the huge auction. Mike sold off hundreds of cars, some of which he had owned for more than 30 years. To fans, it felt like the end of an era. But for Mike, it was something deeper. It was a turning point in his life, the moment he finally accepted that he could not keep carrying the weight of Rust Valley alone. People keep asking what happened to Mike Hall after the show ended. The real answer is simple and sad at the same time. He needed to slow down. He needed to breathe. He needed to step back after a lifetime of chasing rust. And while the world may miss seeing him on screen, Mike Hall is doing what he's always done, trying to live life his own way, even if that means leaving behind something he loved. The story of Mike Hall is not just about a man and his cars. It is about change, aging, letting go, and learning when it's time to walk away. And in the next paragraphs, we'll explore what the show didn't reveal, his struggles, his losses, his victories, and the real reason Rust Valley Restorers came to an end as the years went by. Mike Hall's life began to change in ways he never expected, and those changes slowly became a part of the mystery that many fans still talk about today. Even though he had been fixing cars for most of his life, there came a moment when even he felt the pressure of time catching up to him. Running Rust Valley was never an easy job. The place was filled with hundreds of old, rusted cars that needed attention, and each car carried its own story, its own problems, and its own challenges. Mike loved each one of them, but loving something and maintaining something are two very different things. Every day the workload grew heavier, and every year his body grew older. The long hours, the endless repairs, and the constant stress of keeping the business alive slowly began to affect him. People who visited the yard noticed that the cheerful sparkle in his eyes sometimes looked dimmer than before. He still wore his hat, still cracked his jokes, still smiled at fans, but behind that smile was a man who knew he was reaching a point where he had to make a difficult choice. Many fans around the world assumed Mike's life was all fun and adventure, but very few understood the real emotional and financial weight that sat on his shoulders. Rust Valley was not just a TV show. It was his life's work, his dream, and sometimes his biggest burden. Money was one of the biggest problems. While the show made Mike famous, it didn't magically solve his financial struggles. Car restoration is extremely expensive. You can spend thousands of dollars on a single project and still not make enough profit to keep the business running smoothly. Mike loved restoring cars, but he hated selling them. For him, each car felt like an old friend, and letting one go always felt painful. Because of that, he kept too many cars, saved too many projects, and sometimes refused offers that could have helped him financially. This emotional connection made him loved by fans, but it also made running the business much harder. His team, including Avery and Connor, often worried about him. They could see the stress in his eyes, even when he tried to hide it behind humor. At one point, the yard became so full that Mike admitted he had reached a breaking point. He said that he was tired of fighting rising costs, tired of working day and night, and tired of watching his dreams slowly become a burden. But it wasn't just money or age that weighed on Mike. The pressure of fame was also new to him. When Rust Valley Restorers became popular, fans from all over the world began visiting his yard. Many of them wanted photos, autographs, or just a chance to talk to the man they loved watching on TV. Mike appreciated every single fan, but he was also a simple man who valued peace and privacy. The nonstop attention sometimes made him feel overwhelmed. He had never imagined that his quiet life in the mountains would turn into something so public. He enjoyed the show, but he didn't always enjoy everything that came with it. Being recognized everywhere he went, being asked the same questions again and again, and constantly feeling like he had to keep performing for the camera. These things slowly started to drain him. Deep down, Mike was a man who loved working with his hands, not posing for lights and cameras. Fame was exciting, but it also came with its own kind of exhaustion. Another major challenge was time, something Mike always felt slipping away. He knew he was getting older. He knew he couldn't climb under cars or lift heavy parts the way he once could. He often joked about it, but behind the joke was a truth he didn't like facing. Rust Valley had taken a lifetime to build, and now he was worried about what would happen to it when he could no longer work. He began thinking more about his family, especially his son Connor. He wanted Connor to have a stable future, not one filled with the same stress and financial struggles he had lived through. But at the same time, he didn't want to let go of his dream. It felt like every decision he made came with a sacrifice, and every sacrifice came with a little bit of heartbreak. This emotional battle became one of the biggest reasons behind the changes in Mike's life. The changes that led fans to ask the same question again and again: what really happened to Mike Hall? As rumors began to spread about Mike's future, many people wondered whether he was simply tired or whether something deeper was happening behind the scenes. The truth is, the emotional load of running Rust Valley became heavier with every passing month, and Mike found himself thinking about decisions he never imagined he would face. His attachment to the cars had always been strong, but over the years it transformed into something even more personal. Each car reminded him of a different chapter of his life. Friends he had lost, memories from his childhood, lessons from earlier mistakes, and a passion that kept him going when everything around him seemed to fall apart. When Mike looked out over the huge field of rusting cars, he didn't see junk. He saw a lifetime of stories, a map of everything he had been through. Letting go of even one car felt like letting go of a part of himself. This emotional connection was beautiful, but it also kept him stuck. He knew he couldn't keep every car forever. He knew time was moving forward, whether he liked it or not. And he knew that if he didn't make a decision soon, Rust Valley might collapse under its own weight. The show brought him fame. But fame also brought conflicts. Conflict within the business, within the team, and even within Mike himself. As more people began visiting the yard, expectations grew higher, and the pressure to deliver dramatic restorations increased. The production team sometimes pushed for bigger stories, faster deadlines, and more intense drama, because that's what television demands. But that wasn't how Mike liked to work. He was a slow, careful craftsman who believed in enjoying the process, not rushing it. The constant push to create good TV moments often clashed with the way he naturally lived his life. Avery, with his wild personality, brought humor to the show, but even he could see that Mike was getting tired of the back-and-forth stress that came with filming. There were days when Mike felt the cameras turn his passion into pressure, and the joy of restoring cars slowly shifted into the responsibility of keeping the show successful. This shift wore him down more than many people realized. Another factor was emotional weight of failure, something Mike rarely talked about. Rust Valley Restorers made many of his restorations look easy, but off-camera, things were very different. Some cars took months longer than expected. Others cost far more money than planned. There were deals that fell apart, customers who changed their minds, parts that were impossible to find, and mechanical problems that seemed to come out of nowhere. Every business owner faces challenges, but when your challenges are being filmed and judged by millions, the pressure becomes intense. Mike often worried about disappointing fans, disappointing his team, and disappointing himself. When a restoration went wrong, he felt it deeply, even if he didn't show it. These quiet moments of frustration built up over time, adding to the already heavy emotional load. He carried it on top of all this. There was the question of the future of Rust Valley itself. Mike had built something unique, something people loved, something that felt almost magical. But he knew magic alone couldn't run a business. The thought of losing Rust Valley broke his heart, but the thought of passing on in a broken, struggling state felt even worse. He wanted the legacy of Rust Valley to stay alive long after he was gone. He wanted people to remember the place not as a financial burden, but as a symbol of passion, loyalty, and love for old cars. The idea of selling the yard entered his mind more than once, but every time he considered it, he felt like he was betraying the dream he had spent a lifetime building. It was a painful conflict between heart and reality, between passion and survival, between holding on and letting go. And as these pressures grew stronger, Mike's health and energy began to shift. He wasn't as fast, wasn't as strong, and wasn't as determined as he had been in the early seasons of the show. Viewers noticed it too. Some said he looked tired. Others said he looked sad. Some simply said he looked older. And while aging is natural, the emotional strain he carried made everything feel heavier. This slow but steady change made many fans ask the same question. Was Mike stepping away from the spotlight because he wanted to, or because he had to? Whatever the answer, it was clear that the man who once fought to keep every car was now fighting something much bigger. The fear of losing himself in the process as the challenges piled up, Mike began to think more seriously about stepping back, even if it meant saying goodbye to a part of himself. The idea didn't come all at once. It grew slowly, like a shadow stretching across the yard he had loved for so long. He would walk between the rows of old cars and feel something inside him shift. These cars had been his world for decades, but now, rather than feeling excitement, he often felt a quiet sadness, a reminder that life moves forward whether we are ready or not. He started having longer conversations with his son Connor, who had grown from a young mechanic into a capable leader. Connor had the passion, the energy, and the fresh ideas the business needed. But even with his skills, Mike knew running Rust Valley required more than just talent. It required sacrifice, and he didn't want his son to carry the same heavy burden he had carried for years. This thought often weighed heavily on him. Mike also began reflecting on moments he missed because of work. There were times when he stayed at the yard late into the night, times when he skipped family gatherings, times when he didn't rest even when his body begged him to stop. He realized that while Rust Valley had given him purpose, it had also taken pieces of his life that he could never get back. For the first time, he wondered what it would feel like to slow down, to breathe, to wake up without the pressure of deadlines or the noise of cameras. He imagined spending more time with his loved ones, taking quiet walks to the mountains, or even working on cars just for fun. Not for profit, not for TV, but for the simple joy he felt when he first fell in love with restoration as a young boy. These thoughts brought him peace, but also guilt. How could he walk away from something he had built with his own hands? How could he leave behind the fans who supported him? These questions followed him everywhere he went, making every decision feel heavier than the last. Meanwhile, rumors outside the yard began to grow. Fans noticed that filming slowed down. Some episodes felt different, as if Mike wasn't fully present. They wondered whether something was wrong, whether he was sick, whether he had personal problems, or whether he was simply tired of pressure. Social media filled with questions, speculation, and worry. Many said Mike deserved rest. Others begged him not to quit the show. Through all this noise, Mike stayed quiet. He didn't want drama. He didn't want attention. He wanted time to think, without the world watching. But the more he stayed silent, the more people asked, what really happened to Mike Hall? And the truth was simple. Life happened. A lifetime of work, love, sacrifice, stress, and passion all came crashing together. Forcing to choose between holding on and letting go one of the biggest turning points came when Mike realized that selling the yard might be the only way to save it. Rust Valley wasn't just full of old cars. It was full of old bills, old problems, and old stress that refused to disappear. The show brought viewers joy, but behind the scenes, financial pressure was building like a storm. Mike had poured nearly everything he had into keeping Rust Valley alive, and there came a moment when he knew he couldn't do it anymore. Selling was not a sign of defeat. It was a sign of love. He wanted Rust Valley to have a future, even if he wasn't the one guiding it. This decision didn't come easily. It took countless sleepless nights, long conversations, and emotional moments that never made it on camera. But in the end, he realized that letting go might be the only way to protect a dream he had spent his entire life chasing. When the time finally came to announce his decision, Mike felt a mix of sadness, relief, fear, and acceptance. He stood in the yard, surrounded by the rusted cars that had shaped his journey, and felt a deep sense of peace wash over him. He had done everything he could, given everything he had, and left nothing undone, whether fans agreed with his decision or not. He knew he needed to choose what was right for his health, his family, and his future. Stepping back was not the end of his story. It was simply the beginning of a new chapter. And as he prepared to walk away from the spotlight, one thing remained clear. Mike Hall's passion, heart, and legacy would live on long after the cameras stopped rolling. After Mike's announcement, the story didn't end. It simply shifted into a new phase, one that revealed even more about the man behind the legend. As Rust Valley began preparing for this major change, people close to Mike noticed something interesting. For the first time in a long while, he started to breathe easier. The constant pressure that followed him for years slowly began to lift. He no longer had to make impossible decisions every day. He no longer had to carry the weight of hundreds of unfinished projects on his shoulders. And he no longer had to pretend to be strong when he was feeling overwhelmed inside. Instead, he now allowed himself to slow down, to think clearly, and to reconnect with the parts of life he had unintentionally ignored while fighting to protect Rust Valley. This transformation didn't happen overnight, but as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Mike began to rediscover himself in a way he hadn't expected. One of the first things Mike did was reconnect with nature, something he'd always loved but rarely had time to enjoy. The mountains surrounding Rust Valley had been his home for decades, but during the busy years of filming and restoring cars, he often forgot to appreciate their quiet beauty. Now, without the noise of engines, phone calls, and deadlines, he began taking long walks through the woods, breathing in the fresh air and listening to the peaceful silence that had always been there, waiting for him. These moments became healing for him. They gave him time to reflect on the past, to understand his choices, and to accept the journey that had brought him to this point. For the first time in years, he felt like he was living life, not just surviving it. Meanwhile, something else began to happen, something that surprised even Mike himself. With the pressure gone, he found his love for cars reawakening in a more natural, peaceful way. Instead of working on cars because the cameras were rolling or because customers were waiting, he began working on them simply because he wanted to. Sometimes he would sit in his garage, quietly fixing a small part, remembering how much joy the early days of restoration had brought him. Without the weight of business responsibilities, restoring cars felt like a form of therapy, almost like going back in time to the younger version of himself who fell in love with rusted metal and old engines. This newfound freedom reminded him why he started restoring cars in the first place. Not for money, fame, or recognition, but for the simple joy of bringing old things back to life. The people around Mike also noticed these changes. His friends saw he smiled more. Avery joked that Mike was getting younger, now that he wasn't dealing with the stress of running a massive car yard. Connor felt relieved too. As a son, he had always worried about Mike's health and the emotional burden he carried, even when Mike pretended everything was fine. Seeing his father finally relax, finally laugh without pressure, and finally take time for himself brought him a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He knew Mike had made the right decision. Even if it had been a hard one, however, stepping away didn't mean Mike disappeared. In fact, fans still saw him from time to time. He appeared at small events, visited local car meets, and sometimes posted photos online showing glimpses of his quieter new life. These posts always received thousands of comments, with people expressing how much they miss him on the show and how happy they were to see him enjoying his life. Mike never bragged or tried to remain in the spotlight. He simply shared small moments, like a project he was working on, a funny picture with Avery, or a calm day spent in nature. These simple updates reminded everyone that even though he had stepped back from the show, Mike was still the same humble, kind-hearted man he had always been, As the world adjusted to this new chapter, something else became clear. Stepping away had not erased Mike's impact. If anything, it made people appreciate him even more. Fans continued to talk about how his passion had inspired them to restore their own cars, visit junkyards, start projects with their children, or simply chase dreams they had ignored for too long. Mike had unknowingly created a community, one that would continue to grow even without him standing in front of a camera. His story had become bigger than Rust Valley. It had become a lesson about passion, sacrifice, courage, and knowing when to let go. And in many ways, that lesson was far more powerful than any restoration he ever completed as time passed. The story of Mike Hall began to evolve into something deeper, something that went beyond the cars, beyond the show, and even beyond Rust Valley itself. People realized that his journey was not just about leaving a business or stepping away from television. It was about a man learning to value himself after spending a lifetime giving everything away. For years, Mike had poured his heart, soul, money, and energy into restoring old cars and preserving history. These cars were more than metal. They were memories, moments, and pieces of the past he didn't want the world to forget. But what many didn't see was that while Mike was saving these cars, he was also losing little parts of himself. He was losing time, losing peace, losing health, and losing the moments that truly mattered. Now that it stepped away, he finally had the chance to understand what his life had become and what it needed to be moving forward. One of the biggest realizations Mike had during this quiet period was that his identity was never fully tied to Rust Valley or the TV show. For a long time, he believed his purpose came from keeping the art alive and giving people something to smile about. But now, as he spent time doing simple, ordinary things, having long talks with Connor, enjoying a warm cup of coffee on the porch, visiting old friends, and taking slow drives along mountain roads, he began to realize that purpose exists in many forms. Sometimes it appears in big achievements, like building a business or starring in a television series. But other times, purpose is found in much smaller, softer moments that he had missed for far too long. He realized that a life doesn't need to be loud to matter. It doesn't need cameras, chaos, or constant noise. Sometimes a quiet life is the most meaningful life of all. Still, it would be wrong to say Mike never missed Rust Valley. There were days when he felt a deep ache inside him, a reminder of the yard he had nurtured like a child. He would sometimes drive past the old place, and even if it didn't stop, he would slow down and look at the rows of cars in the distance. Some of them were still sitting exactly where he had left them, their rusty bodies glowing softly in the sunlight. When he saw them, memories would rise inside him. The early mornings covered in grease, the heated argument with Avery, the proud moments with Connor, the laughter, the frustration, the victories, and even the mistakes. Rust Valley had been a place of joy and struggle, of passion and exhaustion. It had been his battlefield and his sanctuary. Walking away had been the right decision. But that didn't mean it was easy. Sometimes the right choices hurt the most. But every time those memories pulled him back, something else reminded him why he had left. Peace. He could feel it in his bones, in his breath, in the calmness that had come over his life. For the first time in years, he wasn't rushing. He wasn't planning the next big project or worrying about how to pay for the next restoration. He wasn't trying to balance his heart with the demands of a business. Instead, he was simply living slowly, quietly, peacefully. And the more peace he felt, the more he accepted that life comes in seasons. Rust Valley had been one of the brightest seasons of his life. But seasons change. And when they do, holding on too tightly can cause more pain than letting go. Meanwhile, the world outside continued to admire him. Interviews, articles, fan pages, and documentaries kept discussing what happened to Mike Hall. Some people speculated he might return to TV one day. Others believed he would rebuild a smaller yard. And many simply hoped he was happy. What none of them realized was that Mike wasn't focused on the future anymore. For once, he was focused on the present, on living each day as it came, without pressure or expectations. He still loved cars, still loved the smell of old engines and the feel of rusted metal beneath his hands. But now, he enjoyed them at his own pace, in his own way, and on his own terms. In the end, Mike's story became less about what he lost and more about what he found. He found peace. He found balance. He found time. And most importantly, he found himself again, a version of himself that had been buried beneath responsibility and stress for far too long. This new chapter wasn't about fame or restoration or legacy. It was about something far more valuable. A man finally learning to live for himself after spending a lifetime living for everyone else as the dust settled and Mike adjusted to this new chapter of his life. Something unexpected began to happen. People started looking at him in a different way. For years, fans saw Mike as a rust guru, the man who could turn forgotten wrecks into treasures. They admired his passion, his stubbornness, and his refusal to give up. But now, as they watched him step back for the sake of his health, peace, and happiness, they began admiring him for something else entirely. They admired him for his courage to let go. Letting go is one of the hardest things a person can do, especially for someone like Mike, whose entire identity was tied to the things he built. But he showed the world that strength doesn't always come from holding on. Sometimes real strength comes from knowing when it's time to walk away. And as people reflected on his journey, many realized that Mike's story mirrored something deeply human, something they saw in themselves. They saw the weight of responsibility, the pressure of expectations, the fear of failure, and the exhaustion that slowly steals joy away from life. They saw how passion can become a burden if it's not balanced with rest. They saw how a dream can grow so big that it overshadows the person who created it. Mike's decision to step back became a reminder to millions of people that it's okay to slow down, to breathe, to choose peace over pressure. His story became less about restoring cars and more about restoring oneself. And in a world full of noise, chaos, and constant demands, his quiet choice to prioritize his well-being spoke louder than any episode ever could. Meanwhile, Rust Valley itself entered a phase of uncertainty. Fans wondered what would happen to the yard. Would it be sold? Would another buyer take over? Would it continue the legacy Mike had built? These questions echoed across social media, forums, and YouTube channels, analyzing every small update. Even former cast members were unsure of what the future held. Some hoped for a revival. Others accepted that the era had ended, and a few wished Mike would return someday, even if only for a short cameo. But Mike knew that once he stepped away, returning wouldn't feel right. He felt that the story had reached a natural conclusion, and returning just for the sake of nostalgia would take away from the meaning of his decision. Life wasn't a loop for him. It was a path, and he was determined to move forward, not backward. Still, that didn't stop the memories from flowing. Every once in a while, someone in town would stop Mike and share how Rust Valley restorers had changed their life. A father would say the show brought him and his son closer as they worked on a car together. A young mechanic would explain that Mike inspired him to follow his dreams. An older viewer would say the show helped him through depression or loneliness by giving him something comforting to watch. Mike never expected to touch so many lives. He never set out to become a celebrity or an inspiration. He simply followed his passion. And yet, simply by being himself, he created a ripple effect that reached people from all around the world. That in many ways became his greatest restoration project, not the cars, but the hearts he unknowingly repaired. Even though he wasn't filming anymore, Mike continued to live with the same values that shaped the show. He stayed humble, grounded, and grateful. He never bragged about his fame, never acted like a star, and never let success change who he was. If anything, stepping away showed how genuine he truly was. Many celebrities chase the spotlight endlessly, even when it harms them. But Mike didn't. He chose peace over popularity. He chose health over fame. He chose family over pressure. And that decision made people admire him more than ever before. As Mike settled into this slower pace of life, he began to appreciate things that had always been around him but had been overshadowed by stress. The quiet mornings, the smell of pine trees, the soft crunch of gravel under his boots, the warmth of a cup of coffee held between tired hands. These simple moments had become precious. He found joy in things that cost nothing, watching the sun set behind the mountains, hearing birds sing in the early hours, sharing stories with old friends, or just sitting peacefully in a garage without a deadline chasing him. For a man who spent decades fighting against time, this was the first time he felt it slow down. And as fans watched this transformation, they realized something important. This wasn't the end of Mike Hall's story. It was simply a new beginning, quieter, softer, and more meaningful than the one before. Rust Valley had been his world, but now, the world outside Rust Valley finally had space to grow around him as the years passed, and Mike Hall continued living in his quiet corner of British Columbia. The world around him changed, but he stayed almost exactly the same. He was still the same guy who loved old cars more than anything, who believed that every broken machine had a story, and who never backed away from hard work, no matter how tired his body felt. But even though he kept a simple lifestyle, people around him noticed that something inside him was shifting. It was not a dramatic change or a sudden drop in his energy. It was more like a slow turning of a page in a very old book. The adventures that once excited him were starting to feel heavier, and the plans that once felt thrilling were now harder to complete. Mike had always been known as a man who pushed himself too much, working long hours under the sun, lifting heavy parts, climbing on old car frames, and running a massive junkyard almost alone. His friends often warned him that his age would eventually catch up, but Mike always laughed it off. Still, with time, even he began to understand that life was asking him to slow down just a little. For years, fans of the show wondered what Mike would decide for the future. Would he keep collecting cars forever, or would he finally take a break? Even Mike did not have a clear answer. He had built Rust Valley with his own hands, and it was more than just a business to him. It was a place where he had buried his happiest memories, his biggest dreams, and even a few moments of sadness. Every car in that field reminded him of someone he met, something he learned, or a chapter of his life that had passed long ago. Selling the vehicles was not just about money. It was about letting go of parts of his history, and that was not easy for him. But he also knew that he could not keep working the same way forever. The piles of rusted cars were getting taller, the work was becoming heavier, and the responsibility of keeping everything running was starting to weigh on him in a way he had never felt before. Throughout this time, Mike often talked about how important it was to follow your passion, even when others think you are crazy. He said it in interviews on the show, and even to young people who visited Rust Valley. He believed that life was too short to live in fear of judgment. His own life was proof of that. Many people told him he was foolish for collecting so many cars. Many advised him to sell Rust Valley long before he ever considered it. But Mike never listened to those voices. He only listened to his heart. And in the end, the heart that once pushed him to build something so huge was now whispering something different. It was telling him to rest, to enjoy the time he had left, and finally slow down after decades of running at full speed. This inner shift also changed how Mike viewed his legacy. For a long time, he did not think about what he would leave behind or how people would remember him. He just worked, lived, and loved cars. But as the years passed, he began to realize that Rust Valley had become bigger than expected. It was not just his dream anymore. It had become a symbol for car lovers around the world. People from faraway countries visited his yard like it was a landmark. Kids who watched the show grew up wanting to learn about restoration. Old mechanics who had stopped working were inspired to return to their tools. Families watched together because the show felt warm, honest, and real. Mike was surprised by this impact, but also deeply grateful for it. He often said that the best part of being on television was meeting people who felt inspired because of him. And so, with this new understanding, Mike started to focus more on what truly mattered to him, spending time with people he cared about, enjoying the natural beauty around his home, and working at a pace that made him happy instead of overwhelmed. He never lost his love for cars, but he began to appreciate the quieter moments in life, the sunsets, the peaceful nights, the simple conversations with friends. Rust Valley would always be a part of him, but he finally allowed himself to imagine a life where he didn't carry the entire weight of it on his shoulders. For the first time in a very long time, Mike Hall chose balance over chaos, rest over stress, and peace over pressure. It was not the end of his story, just the beginning of a new chapter that he had earned through years of hard work, passion, and dedication. As Mike Hall moved into this calmer chapter of his life, many people wonder what his days actually looked like without the constant noise of filming, the pressure of deadlines, and the never-ending rush of restoring one car after another. In truth, Mike's days became slower, softer, and more personal. He woke up early, just like always, but now he did not rush outside to start work before the sun rose. Instead, he took his time, enjoyed a quiet cup of coffee, listened to the birds, and appreciated the morning view that he had ignored for years because he was always too busy to notice it. Rust Valley was still there, stretching across the hills with hundreds of cars resting under the open sky. But it no longer demanded every minute of his time. For the first time since building that massive yard, Mike was not in a hurry. He allowed the moments to pass naturally, without stress or expectations. Even though he slowed down, Mike could never fully walk away from his passion. Cars were in his blood. He still wandered through the yard, touching old fenders, checking dusty dashboards, and smiling when he saw a car he had rescued long ago. Each vehicle was like an old friend, and he enjoyed visiting them at his own pace. Sometimes he would fix something small, maybe tighten a bolt, grease a hinge, or wipe down a piece of chrome just because it made him happy. These little tasks reminded him of the reason he fell in love with cars in the first place. Not for money or fame, but for the simple joy of working with his hands. Without the pressures of the show, these moments became therapy for him. They were quiet, peaceful, and deeply satisfying, allowing him to enjoy his passion without the weight of responsibility. People in his town also noticed a change in him. He smiled more, he laughed more, and he looked lighter, as if a huge burden had been lifted from his shoulders. Mike had always been well-liked in his community, but now he had more time to talk with neighbors, hear their stories, and share his own. Many of them had watched him transform Rust Valley from a crazy dream into a world-famous landmark. They respected him not just for what he built, but for the stubborn, honest, hard-working spirit behind it. With more free time, Mike started showing up to small local events. He attended car meets, charity fundraisers, and community gatherings. Instead of being a man always too busy to stay, he became someone who sat, talked, laughed, and actually enjoyed the company around and out on social media. Fans around the world kept asking the same questions. Where's Mike? Why isn't he on TV anymore? Will Rust Valley Restorers ever come back? Some people created theories. Some guessed health issues, and others assumed he had retired completely. But the truth was simpler and strangely beautiful. Mike was finally living life on his own terms. He did not need cameras to feel fulfilled. He did not need millions of viewers to validate his passion. He just needed some peace, some quiet, and the freedom to enjoy the world he had spent decades building. And while he didn't post updates regularly, the few times he did, fans felt reassured. They saw him smiling, joking, or standing beside a car he loved, and they knew he was okay. The biggest surprise to many fans was that Mike did not completely shut the door on to opportunities. He just wanted to choose them carefully. He talked openly about the possibility of doing small projects now and then, maybe helping with special restorations or sharing stories from his massive collection. But he wanted to do these things only if they felt right, not because he was pressured. After spending years working nonstop and being filmed almost every day, he earned the right to be selective. He earned the right to say no. And most importantly, he earned the right to enjoy life at a slower pace without feeling guilty. Mike's story became more than just a tale of cars, rust, and restoration. It became a lesson in knowing when to hold on and when to let go. As the world kept changing around him, Mike Hall found himself reflecting more often on the journey that had shaped him. He sometimes sat on an old metal chair outside his workshop, looking over the hills filled with cars, and replaying the story of how everything started. Many people only knew him as the Rust Valley guy, the eccentric man with wild hair and a yard full of rusty cars. But Mike's story stretched far beyond what the cameras ever showed. Long before television, long before fame, long before thousands of fans recognized his face, Mike was simply a hard-working man who believed in following his heart, even when nobody understood him. And now, looking back, he realized that every crazy decision, every risky move, and every long day of work had led him to a life that was full of meaning, not because it was perfect, but because it was his own creation. During these quiet moments, Mike often thought about the people who had supported him along the way. His family, his friends, and the loyal crew who stood by him during the filming of Rust Valley Restorers. They had all played a role in his journey. He never pretended to be someone he wasn't, and that honesty made people love him even more. He was messy, stubborn, and sometimes chaotic, but he was also real. He did not hide behind fancy words or pretend to be polished for the cameras. He simply showed up as Mike Hall, the man who loved Rust more than gold, and viewers found comfort in his authenticity. Many fans wrote letters or sent messages saying that Mike reminded them of a relative, a neighbor, or even a version of themselves that they wished they could return to a version that chased dreams without worrying about judgment. As he grew older, Mike learned to value these connections more deeply. He realized that his influence reached far beyond the borders of his small Canadian town. People from different countries, speaking different languages, shared the same admiration for him. They admired his courage, his humor, and his refusal to give up on the things he loved. But instead of letting this admiration make him proud or arrogant, Mike stayed humble. He often said, "I'm just a guy who likes old cars." And in a way, that was the truth. Fame had never changed him because he never chased it to begin with. All he wanted was to save the cars he felt deserved another chance. The rest of it, the TV show, the fans, the interviews, was just a bonus, something he accepted with gratitude but never let define him. With more time to slow down, Mike also started thinking about the future of Rust Valley. He knew he would not be able to care for the entire yard forever, and he didn't want his life's work to be lost when he could no longer maintain it. He talked with his son, his close friends, and people he trusted about different possibilities.